Hello and welcome. This is our Week 9, Chapter 4 interview. My name is Daniel Johnson, and I'll be interviewing Danny Cepero, assistant men's soccer coach here at U of L. Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks.
And now, today we're just going to be talking about anxiety in the frame of competitive sport. And success and failure in competitive sport can produce extremely high levels of anxiety, which is characterized by nervousness, worry, and apprehension. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between an athlete's anxiety and his performance in these competitions?
Sure. Just in my own personal experience, I think there's a very close relationship between anxiety and an athlete's performance, as anyone might be able to guess. Nerves are natural, especially in pressure situations that high-level athletes find themselves in. So how those feelings of anxiety, how those nerves are handled is paramount to the athlete's performance in those instances and during those events. So it can go up or down. We've all seen athletes that buckle under the pressure, so to speak. And we've also seen athletes achieve really, really great things in situations where many people thought that success was almost impossible. So you can see that it works both ways.
And you touched on something about using the anxiety both ways in terms of helping or hindering one's performance. And with this anxiety comes this feeling of increased arousal, which is the intensity dimension around a certain moment. And in this instance, it's the moment right before a performance. Talking about that time right before you perform, how can one manage this feeling? I know in the weeks leading up, you had talked about how important it is to manage it, but right before your big performance, how can one manage this, really intense feeling of physical and mental arousal?
Yeah, I think for me there are two different possibilities. Some people, from what I've seen in my experiences, like being pumped up. They like the yelling and the chest beating and the chanting. They like the crowd noise. They thrive on that right before they go out onto the field or right before they get out of the locker room. Whether it's the music they listen to, whether it's their teammates, whether it's a coach of theirs that's getting them amped up. Some people like to amplify the amplification, if you will,
right,
of those senses, so that everything's at like an extreme height, and they use that to help better their performance. But I've also seen it on the flip side, where for others they like to calm it down and slow it down. I'm not a scientist and I'm not an expert for sure, but in my experience, I've tended to go with the latter in terms of being able to visualize, close my eyes, visualize success, visualize my performance, get an idea of what I'm going to see on the field. What is the opponent going to look like? What kind of weather am I working with? All of those things to help kind of calm the intensity, so that when I do step onto the field and that moment does hit me, that I'm not overwhelmed by it, that it's not being kind of desensitized to all the
right,
feelings. So I've seen it go both ways in terms of the intensity of the arousal, but also in trying to kind of center yourself and get it back down, because we all know that once we get onto the field or the court or whatever, that the feelings will certainly manifest themselves. So however best an individual does it, I've seen it both ways for sure.
right. And you sort of touched on that in your answer. But in class, we had discussed the most popular theory now in terms of relating arousal to performance. It's called the inverted U hypothesis. And in this hypothesis, it states that low arousal levels produce low performance, but also arousal levels that are too high can similarly produce poor performance. And you talked about, people going two different ways, either, getting really pumped up or being more relaxed. For someone who has studied and looked at, the inverted U hypothesis, can you talk a little bit about players finding that what's called the individual zone of optimal functioning? So, if they get pumped up, they might become too pumped up, and then they find that performance, was a poor performance after that strategy. And if they get too relaxed, it can obviously lead to a similarly poor performance. How can a player really know when he's in that optimal zone of functioning?
I think that's the $1,000,000 question. I think once you figure that out, you've kind of got the solution to it. I think it takes a lot of experimentation on an individual level, even on a team level. I think trying to figure out what works best for each individual to try and find what you said, that optimal zone. I think it's really at the crux of what it sounds like you guys are studying. And I think if you look at athletes who we perceive as those who have figured it out, if you ask them, I think you would imagine that they would say it took time, it took experimentation, it took them failing in order to understand where they feel most comfortable before a big match, before a big game, of how to perform. For me personally, I've experienced both. I've experienced where I kind of go into a game and I'm too relaxed and I'm not matching the intensity of the moment of the game, and it takes something to wake me up and snap me out of that. And in what we do, sometimes that's too late. And I've also been super amped up, very pumped up, and I go out and for whatever reason the game doesn't match up with my intensity, and now I feel like I'm expending energy needlessly to my detriment, where now I'm playing outside of my limits and in a bad way, where I'm trying to do too much and be Superman. And that's what you want to try and find that balance. So how you do that, I think, is experimentation. You've got to listen to yourself. You got to listen to what kind of triggers. When I think about it, I think of these triggers, whether it's a particular opponent, whether it's a particular play, whether it's something that's said, maybe something you tell yourself in terms of self-talk, something that triggers that heightened awareness that you can use in times where perhaps the arousal is too low, or perhaps you can use to calm yourself down. But the only way to do that is to, one, have something like that in terms of self-talk, and two, be able to recognize when those moments are. Am I a type of player that gets too amped up? And if so, what can I tell myself to kind of lower it back down, and now I can find the rhythm of the game? Or vice versa, if I'm too calm, too relaxed, what are those triggers in a game or before a match that kind of wake me up, and how can I identify them before they occur so that I'm there and prepared for them when they come up? So it's a trial and error, I would imagine, and that's how it has been for me personally.
And you sort of alluded to your own, personal experiences, and I know that you played professionally in both the MLS and the USL, being a draft pick out of college to the New York Red Bulls, going over to Europe for a short amount of time, and it's something that you alluded to in your previous answer about how experimenting and then perhaps failing has helped athletes really find that optimal zone of functioning. But it's no secret that with this anxiety can come some failure. How can an athlete who suffers from anxiety and then fails really deal and cope with that failure to bounce back so that it doesn't occur again? And if no athlete is perfect, then your own personal failure in your own career along with your successes, how have you been able to do that?
Yeah, I think the one word that comes to mind as you ask that question for me is preparation. If you prepare as intensely and as focused as possible before a match, before a game, before any kind of competition, that I believe will help stem any kind of stunt the growth of any anxiety that might exist wherever it might exist within yourself. If I go into a match knowing that I'm prepared for an opponent, prepared for a certain strategy that I've worked out as hard as I could, in the weekdays leading up to it, then when I hear the crowd roaring, when I hear my own doubts perhaps creeping into my head of what happens if I fail, what happens if I'm not able to get a contract here, what happens, that you're able to quiet those because you know that you have everything in your possession to give yourself the best opportunity to succeed. When you have that, whether that's watching film, whether that's extra hours in the weight room, whether that's staying longer after training, whatever it might be, when you're as prepared as you possibly can be, maybe even a little bit more, I think you find that that's where the high-level athletes live. They live in that heightened state of preparation where no matter what's going on the other side of that door as they walk onto the field, they feel confident and prepared, regardless of how anxious they may be. It doesn't eliminate the anxiety. It doesn't eliminate nerves, but it helps have a sense of calm about it when things might get crazy. When you go down a goal, when you're riding high, and you just threw 3 touchdown passes, whatever it might be. I think that preparation for me has been hugely important as I've done all these things. Is look, I've put extra hours in, I've put as much work in as possible, and I'm going to go out there and work as hard as I can. And if this coach or if that manager doesn't believe that I'm the right fit for them, then so be it. But at least I can look at myself in the mirror and know look, that was the best I could do.
And we talk about in this class a lot the techniques we can use to curb this sort of anxiety. And you touched on one is the preparation. And I know here at U of L, before games, we do breathing exercises. And as much as people, get affected mentally and emotionally, there's also a physical effect to anxiety. And I guess the last thing I want to touch on is, in addition to, extreme preparation, are there any physical techniques that you have found or you have seen used, such as breathing, that can help be a last-ditch resort to really curb this anxiety and high levels of arousal?
Yeah, I think you touched upon a couple of them. What we do here in terms of visualization, in terms of simple breathing exercises, I think those are great, and I've seen them work wonders for me personally. I've also begun the use of kind of a mantra, if you will, that I kind of say to myself, not out loud necessarily, but in my head, that helps me kind of refocus when things are maybe going off kilter, and that's one way that I found works. The difficulty, I think, lies in while you're in a match, while you're in a game, while you're in a contest, whatever it might be. How can you kind of call personal timeout? Yeah. That's hard to do, especially in a game like soccer where there are no artificial timeouts. So I think for me, in those instances, it has been that maybe a couple of words, that sentence that I use to help me at least get back to center. And it's not always perfect, but I think in games like that, it helps a lot because you don't have a ton of time. You can't go into a room and say, okay, we've got 30 seconds, let's figure it out. Here's what went wrong, here's what I need to do. In a game that's continuous like that, where sometimes momentum can get the better of you, what's the quickest way to do it? I found that that's an easy way. Visualization and breathing are great, but you can't, in the middle of a match, sit down and start visualizing and breathing. So before a match, for sure, even afterwards, looking at it and thinking, okay, what went right, what went wrong, how can we prevent that? But in the moment, I've noticed for me personally of taking that quick second and saying, okay, here's, and whatever it might be, enter your own mantra here, that can help. As well as I think what we preach here is about taking the focus off of yourself for a second and helping your teammates.
Right. Communicating
to the teammates, for me as a goalkeeper, it was always easy because it was always about them. How can I direct these guys? And then afterwards, it was, okay, now it becomes pretty simple what I need to do. I have to make this save or I have to come out for this ball. So that helped me a lot. For field players or for anybody else or in individual sports, it becomes a little bit more difficult. But if there's any way that, which seems kind of counterintuitive, you can take the focus off of yourself, I think that can also help you refocus by helping the other guys next to you, with, of course, the idea that they're going to help you.
Exactly.
So I think that's what you get when you have great teams, is you get that back and forth, that it's not, I need to handle myself, and then somebody else, it's, well, I'm struggling, I can help him, and then he's struggling perhaps, and now he can help me, and now you've got a two-way street, and you have all those kind of neurons firing, if you will, on the team, those lines of communication are firing. Now you're working as a true team, even when somebody's struggling.
Some great insight there, Coach, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today about anxiety, stress, these different subjects, and you've really given us some good thought and insight into dealing with it and understanding with it. So I really appreciate you today, and thank you.
For sure, my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.